Welcome, scholars, again to another presentation in the series in the class History of the Christian Church, Part 1. May the kind Lord, who has been kind to us in all that we have done, continue to be with us as we continue to learn. The part of history we have now begun in the history of the Christian Church marks a section that is different from the earlier section, commonly known as the ancient history of the Christian Church. We are now beginning the medieval section of the history of the Christian Church. And if you have followed everything we have said and how the 590 AD ended with the church, you can now come to the section where, in his own providence, God starts a new era, the medieval time, which will last for hundreds of years to come, starts a new era with an able church leader, Gregory I, or commonly known as Gregory the Great. Gregory the Great, just give a little bit of a background to it. Anytime history calls somebody by name and then they say the Great, simply means they did some very big things. Gregory the Great, who is regarded as the first pope of the medieval, and his office began from 590 to 604 when he died. This is a man who is he is just the right fit for that time. When you contrast his spirituality, his maturity in governing the church, to those who will follow him, you will just see a contrast. When he was actually elected to be pope, something he did not even want or choose, but the people simply elected him to be pope in 590. When he was elected pope, at that time, a lot had been gathered now to let the Bishop of Rome excel as the first. He chose to be called a servant of the servants of God. A servant of the servants of God. How many times many of you, myself included, have wished leaders today would really call themselves servants of the servant of the servants of God, and even put that expression into practice. This is how Gregory actually was. The context and the background, Gregory's appointment to Bishop of Rome constitutes a watershed that divides the ancient period of church history from that of the medieval history. And this is one reason why historians take 590 as the dividing time between or from ancient period of church history to the medieval church history. And this is the context. When you proceed to see how now this person, Gregory the Great, developed to taking up the office of Bishop of Rome, here are some few points that would help us and appreciate. He was born into a wealthy family. He was educated and fitted for government work. As a matter of fact, he was working for the empire when he was elected as Bishop of Rome. Even though at that time he had been sent to do some work, connected obviously with the church, but he was a person who was familiar with government work. At the time he existed, as you can see, 540, leading up to 604, he was familiar with the writings of the great Jerome, the great Ambrose, and St. Augustine. As a matter of fact, not only was he familiar with the writings of these three great men, spiritual men, but you will notice that toward the end of his life, he is actually ranked among them as one of the greatest theologians of the church. His father had sent him for good education, where he got educated and became prefect of Rome, a position of importance and honor in government. Shortly after that, something happened. His father died, his parents died, and he decided to give up the wealth he inherited and entered into a convent. Now, let me build up now on what we have covered in the past. You remember, monasticism had become something that people embraced as a way of expressing how committed they were to God and how deep they had gone into the things of God. As such, when he inherited the wealth, and I think we don't need to downplay this, because this is critical. This man was working. This man inherited a lot of wealth. He decided to give up the wealth that he had inherited and entered into a convent. He literally used his wealth to build even 7 monasteries in Italy. He became a monk because he thought ascetic life was a way to glorify God. You remember, monks are people who decided to just dedicate their lives by being alone and reflecting over God and denying themselves of things that are not necessarily wrong, but choosing not to enjoy those things as a way of their commitment to God. He became a monk. This is, I have always said this to you, scholars, the purpose of learning history is not to know facts, but it's to find lessons from there. How many of God's ministers today, God's church leaders today, would come to the point when elected into senior positions, call themselves a servant of the servants of God and practice that? How many, given wealth that they would inherit, would choose to give up that wealth, give it to the poor, go into a life of a monk, giving up everything that is supposedly still a gift from God to be enjoyed, but for the sake of God, they give it up? That was this man, Gregory the Great. And so when Pope Pelagius died in 590, Gregory was made the Pope. It's interesting to notice that his renunciation of great wealth impressed the people of his day. He was a man of humility who thought of himself as the servant of the servants. He was a zealous missionary and was instrumental in winning the English people to Christianity, as we will later discover. His legal training, as I said, gave him tact and common sense, so that he was an able administrator that the Roman Church had during the Middle Ages. And this comment cannot be made on many. And so some of the greatest works of Gregory would include the following. He expanded the power of the Bishop of Rome, or the Pope. Gregory's great work was actually regarded, when he took over office, with his influence, with his admirations from people. People respected that office of the Bishop of Rome, and taking advantage of the respect people had, he actually went ahead and expanded its influence. Even though he disclaimed the title of Pope, he exercised the powers that that office had, which later popes had to use when they were elected. It's very interesting to note that as he was, that is a great person in the way he was, he actually wanted to make sure that the office he occupied was respected, and as an able administrator, as we will learn, he did great things for that. Actually, when there was a time when the bishop or the patriarch of Constantinople, you remember we've always said 2 bishops began growing in stature. By this time, the 2 bishops who had grown in stature, as we just learned, is the Bishop of Rome and the Bishop of Constantinople. Why the Bishop of Constantinople? That was the new Rome, where the emperors actually resided. And so when John, John the Faster, who was the patriarch or the Bishop of Constantinople, came to his appointment as bishop, he actually claimed and said he was the universal bishop. Gregory did not let this, because he wanted to make sure that that office remained one and was not shared. And there was a little bit of tension there until actually Gregory managed to get the support of the emperor in Constantinople to be on his side until the emperor in Constantinople acknowledged Gregory, the Bishop of Rome, as the universal pope, which the patriarch of Constantinople decided and acknowledged. As we said, this was not done in order for him to puff himself up as a great person, because he still operated as a servant of the servants of God. Gregory was instrumental in opening up mission work in England for the English people. He actually sent a man by the name Augustine. Now, don't mistake this Augustine to Augustine of Hippo, as you can tell by periods. This was a different Augustine, who actually went to England and managed to win the English people into the gospel of the Lord Christ Jesus. Gregory was also, when he was made bishop, he actually made the Bishop of Rome very wealthy by his good administration, very wealthy. You know, part of administration, good administration, is that you can manage wealth well. He did that and managed to raise the level of the office of the Bishop of Rome to such a wealthy state that he actually began sponsoring the military if anybody threatened him, using the wealth he had acquired. He was a great organizer and actually is known as the organizer of the Gregorian chant developed by Ambrose. He is known to have been a great preacher with real messages for the time. His sermons were practical and stressed humility and piety, even though, because he was a child of the time, there was a lot of allegorical use in the sermons. This man is ranked with Jerome, Ambrose, and St. Augustine of Hippo as a theologian. When the Roman Catholic names 4 of the church fathers, the doctors of the church of that time, Gregory is named and stands with the names such as Jerome, Ambrose, and Augustine. Now, with this, you now realize that the church is now posed to have entered, or has now entered, its medieval phase with a leader who has given the church a great name, good administration, example of quality leadership. And with this, the church is now able to go into expanding the mission work from the Western church, which is the Western church headed by the Bishop of Rome. You know, one of my prayers and hope is that one of you scholars, if not all of you scholars, will emulate men like Gregory the Great. Decide to become an able administrator, a great preacher, a great scholar, and a person who safeguards the interest of the Christian church. Until we have our next presentation, blessings of the Lord.